Okay, we're starting shortly. This is just a quick sound test. Good evening, everybody. Good evening, everybody from the UK. Welcome to the Excel Spreadsheet Scum Quotes. Welcome back. This is where we do live Excel VBA development aimed at people like you who are trying to learn Excel VBA. Yes, I'm Chris, and I believe the best way to learn is by watching somebody do it live, trying to do it yourself live. That's the way to learn the real skills in Excel VBA coding. So let's get straight into today's task. This task is actually based on a series we have on the Tiger Spreadsheet Solutions channel, which is where we have our more structured formal videos. That's Tiger Spreadsheet Solutions on YouTube. And this video is inspired by a question I got this week on the channel. Just sorry about the echo there, just switched my monitor off. A question we got this week on the channel, which relates to this. So we've got a user form here. This file is from a series called Excel Userforms for Beginners. If you go to YouTube, type in Excel Userform Beginner. It's probably the first one that comes up. You'll see my face anyway. And let's hit add here. Then we're going to see the user form. Now, unfortunately, the user form has appeared on my other screen, so I'm just going to drag it in here. And the question is to do with validation. So we're trying to avoid the situation where the user just does this, clicks continue. Then we get the situation where we've got this notification, nothing has been added to the database. What does that mean? Well, something's happened, something's gone into the database, going down to the bottom of the file now. Something's gone into the database, but we can see that there's no actual data here. So what's happened is we've let the user run the routine, make the entry without data being entered on the form. This is what we mean by validation, because we want to validate the user's inputs by going through the form, and making sure each of the boxes has an entry. So that's our challenge for today. So think, how would you do that? How would you get started with that task? Let me know. Make sure you say hello in the chat. We've got a few in today, so welcome everybody who's in the chat. We've got David in the chat. Welcome, David. David, I'm calling you DC now. I hope you don't mind. And we've got Michelle in the chat. Welcome, Michelle. Really absolute pleasure to have you with me, and let me know if I can answer your questions. But yeah, how would you get started with this task? Michelle or David, we've definitely got you in the chat. So let me know how you would get started. Okay, let's go ahead and open the VBA editor here. So you can go to the Developer tab, of course, Developer tab, and then Visual Basic, or the Alt F11 shortcut Alt F11 shortcut on the Windows PC. And I should say, if you want to download this file, work along with me, go to the Userform series on YouTube. So Tiger Spreadsheet Solution Userform, type it into search. That has the link to this download file, so you can actually work along with me. So this is a code I want to introduce to you, and this code you won't find in the download file. I've just created this code, but how can we get started understanding this code? Well, we've got to know some foundational concepts. We've got to realize that Excel consists of objects and properties, and objects are things like a worksheet is an object, a chart is an object, a workbook is an object. Really anything you can see in Excel is an object, and then objects have properties, and that's something about that object. Like a cell has a value, a cell has formatting, and they're all properties. And then a third concept we want to introduce is that objects exist in collections. So Excel organizes these objects into what's called an object hierarchy. Don't worry about that. Just think about collections. So we have a collection of workbooks, we have a collection of cells, we have collections of worksheets in a file. So by understanding how these concepts fit together, understanding the language we're using here, understanding how it works behind the scenes in Excel, we can harness that to get things working for us. And the particular collection we're interested in is when we look at the user form. Let's just get the user form back up quickly. When we look at the user form, we want to say to Excel, loop through everything in the user form. And Excel does have a collection that's going to help us here. So that's what we're looking to do. And as always with Tiger, we get clear about the concept first. We don't just launch into the coding, talk about it. You know, when I'm doing coding on my own, you know, DC knows, Michelle knows, they've seen lots of my videos. I literally talk it out loud, what I'm trying to do, get that conceptual understanding first, then we can start thinking about the technical stuff. In fact, I'm just going to go ahead and rebuild this code to make sure you understand it. So we're going to go ahead, create a new macro. We've got an informative name for the macro. Then we're going to create a variable. I'm going to say Chris control. And the type of variable is a control. Now, control is one of those words that can be confusing. There's lots of them in Excel, let's face it, but control just means something that's on a user form. At least that's a good working definition, good enough for what we're doing today. And let me know, by the way, how's the sound today? And yeah, DC says, if you're talking out loud, it will get you some stares. Yeah, stares in the office. That's the benefit of working in a micro-sized company. Often I'm coding on my own, but yeah, that's a good point. Or maybe it would kind of get you respect walking around the office just being obsessive about computer code. I'm not sure. But let me know in the chat. DC, Michelle, anybody else in the chat, make sure you say hello. Let me know how the sound is today. How's it all sounding? You can see I've got a new setup, got the mic mounted differently today. Let me know how it's sounding. Yep, so we have the variable type is a control. A control is something on a user form, and then we can harness this idea of a collection. And we're going to say, for each Chris control, so we've repeated the name of the variable there, then we're going to say the name of the user form. Where can we find the user forms in the VBA editor? Well, they exist in the Project Explorer here, and we're interested in the data UF. Chris control in data UF is the name of the user form, the name of the object. And we're going to say dot controls, and controls is the particular collection that we're interested in. Then we can just say next Chris control. So this is going to have the effect of looping through everything on the user form. That's how we could say it in English. But obviously you don't believe me yet, so let's try to demonstrate. Well, I like using message boxes to demonstrate what's happening in VBA. Let's just see if we can get the name of one of the controls on the user form to flash up, or maybe a few of the controls. I'm going to save the file, Control S, step through the code here, F8 key. We're going to have a message box flash up. We've just got false there. So let's say Chris control.name. Now what happened there was, because I didn't specify the property, remember a property is something about an object. So because I didn't specify the property, Excel reverted to the default property, which is the value, which is why it returned the value of false, because that's probably an option button or something. So got to be explicit about the property we're interested in. We're interested in the name of the control. So I'm going to hit F8. Yeah, Dave says use control space more often in your code typing to autofill. So I think you're talking about, okay, yeah. So does that kind of autofill properties, DC? Let me know. Let me know what does that autofill? But I'll certainly try to do that. In fact, I'll see if I can get that working today, DC. So control space to do an autofill. Anyway, so this message box should loop through the, this routine rather, should loop through the controls. Yep, and we can see command button 1 there coming up. Let's get another one. Label 1. There we go. And another one here, label 2. So these are the names of the things on the user form. If I go to the user form in the VBA editor, I can see what's this. Well, this is called label 1 here. Although it's funny, I can't see the toolbox on my screen, but you can see it on your recording, which is kind of annoying. But you can see there, yeah, you can see down here, label 1. Okay, so that's evidence there that we're looping through what's on this user form. So let's go back to the module. I'm in module 2 here. Okay, so we've got the name of the control. Let's see if we can have a second message box here. Let's have a second message box, and let's say ChrisControl.value this time. Now, why is the value property interesting to us? Well, remember what our task is. Our task is to validate the user form. Specifically, we want to know if there's any boxes with nothing in. In other words, if there's any boxes with a value of nothing. So we're interested in the value property. Let's just see what happens here, because, you know, command buttons and things, do they have values? Not absolutely sure what's going to happen here. Okay. Label 1. Okay, yeah. Some of these properties don't have values. So we've got to be specific about some of these controls, rather, don't have values, of course. So we've got to be specific about the controls that we want to look at, because if we look at the whole user form, some of these, we're only interested in certain controls on the user form. You know, the labels, for example, don't matter. The buttons don't matter to us. We're interested in these, which are text boxes, I believe, but we're going to find out in a second. Yeah, I think these will come up as text boxes, but how can we find out the type? Go back to module 2 here. How can we find out the control type? We can say, let's do it this way. ChrisControl name, and put a space in there, and then an underscore, and then we're going to say type name. Type name, and then bracket, and then ChrisControl here. So this should tell us the type. This should tell us, so we're going to hopefully get the name of the control and the type of the control. This is going to help us. It's going to help us to identify those text boxes. Those text boxes we're interested in because they're the ones we want to validate. See what's going on in the chat? Okay, CHR, then control space. Shall I try that, Jeff? If I type CHR, okay, no, that's not doing anything for me. It should fill out the variable name for you or a list of options. Okay, so that's going to save me typing the variable. So for example, if I say for each, so if I hit control space now, very nice, I like it. Okay, cool. So if I now hit C, Chris, control, love it. Okay, brilliant. That's what the Skunk Works is all about. It's about exchanging ideas, getting better, and that includes me. So I've got something new there. So control space, that's going to list the variables, list the different objects and properties available to me. So that's going to save some time in the VBA editor. Thank you to DC and Jeff, who pointed that one out for me. Who else we've got? Oh, welcome, Jeff. Welcome to the chat. Jeff was in the chess stream last night. So on this channel, yeah, I do a few streams a week, trying to do a few streams a week. We have a series where we're building a chess computer in Excel. We've done 22 videos so far. And Jeff was in that stream last night making some good contributions. So that's on Tuesday, #ChessTuesday, Tuesday 6 p.m. UK time. Although I've got an announcement for you, which is this week, because next week I'm away. So this week chess is going to be on at the weekend, probably on Saturday. So we're going to be doing chess on Saturday, not on the Tuesday. So DC and Jeff and Michelle, and I've seen you in the chess streams as well. That's one to put in the diary. Let me know if you'd like to have it at a different time, later or earlier. And I'll see if I can go for a different time to make it easier for certain people. I know some people live in Asia, want to have it at a different time, for example. Anyway, that's going to happen on the Saturday. So let's step through this code now. F8 key. There we go. So we've got command button here. So this is the control type. F8 key again. Label 1 is a label. Let's see if we can get to a text box. Label 2 is a label. Okay. Text first, text box. So this is what we're interested in. So the name of the object, which we can configure ourselves, of course, we'll look second in the VBA editor, is text first, and the type is a text box. So I think this is what we're interested in. Let's go to the user form quickly. I'm going to stop the code now. Now this is what happens when you're using two. Yeah, this does happen when you're using two screens. Does this happen to you? Let me know in the chat. User forms can just suddenly resize, and that kind of gets annoying. It's a bit like Duke Nukem. I know there must be some Duke Nukem geeks in here. So in Duke Nukem, when you've got the gun that shrinks your opponents, that's what it reminds me of. It's just like Duke Nukem's got the gun, he's shrunk the user form. That's what happens. Yeah, so if this user form changes size, we'll have to work around it somehow. So for example, if I click here, I can see this is funny because it's showing the toolbox here, but on my display I can't see the toolbox. Let's go to view. Let's get rid of the toolbox. There we go. And okay, so I've just clicked here, and this control is a text box, and it's called text first. So we've got a mechanism now, or we moving towards a mechanism where we can identify the text boxes, and we want all of those text boxes. How many we got? 1, 2, 3, 4 text boxes. We want to make sure there's an entry in there. So if any of them are blank, then we want to flash up a message to the user saying, make sure you fill out those text boxes before trying to make the entry. Okay, any Duke Nukem fans in the chat? I might have lost everybody there, not absolutely sure, but he had lots of guns, and one of his guns was able to shrink opponents. Okay, so back to the module. Module 2 we're in. Okay, loop through control. So okay, I'm going to give this macro a more suitable name now. Let's call it validate entries. Okay, so here we want to say to Excel in the VBA editor, we want to say if the control is a text box, then we want to do something then. Okay. Okay, there we go. So again, let's test this with a message box. So put a conditional statement in there. So the same mechanism, still looping through all of the controls. But this time we put a conditional statement in, and we're saying to Excel, do something if the control type is a text box. So moving towards the situation where we want to get to, where we just identify the text boxes, making sure that there's values in those. That's how our validation mechanism is going to work. So I'm going to hit the F8 key. I'm expecting to go through the loop a few times. And then, yeah, and then the fourth one is a text box. So now the conditional statement is met. If you like, the conditional statement is true. That means we go into the code and we can see, yeah, and this is the name of our text box, as you'll remember from a couple of minutes ago. So again, I Userform was shrunk. Duke Nukem's there shooting it with his shrinking gun. Let's see what's going on in the chat. DC is saying, I've had issues in the past with buttons controls on worksheets increasing in size when clicked on. Usually happens when using a workbook, then undock work from somewhere else without closing the workbook. Yeah. Buttons and controls. Of course, with buttons, the typical mistake, and I'm absolutely sure you're not making this, DC, but the typical mistake with buttons is to not set the property, not control the properties of the button, of course. So what I mean is, I've got a button here. So right click on the button, go to Format Control, and then go to Properties here. And then we've got options here to make sure the buttons don't move and the buttons don't size with cells. So typically on one of my applications, I'll have this on don't move or size with cells. I was dealing with this today. I've got a custom navigation in a file that I'm working on for a client, and I was working with these properties today. So this is, yeah, if your buttons are resizing, I don't think this is your problem, DC, but if your buttons are resizing, then yeah, right click on the button, Format Control, and then Properties, and then make sure that these properties are properly configured. Yeah, this problem I've had with the shrinking user form, that this has really really hampered me this summer. I've been doing a project this summer with a user form, and in the office I've got a monitor here, and whenever I put the user form onto that monitor, it just shrunk. So whenever I'm working on this project, I'm only working on one screen, which, you know, is a bit of a constraint if you're doing coding, and much easier to do coding on multiple screens, of course. Okay. So we're going to have to, we need someone to store some information. I mean, we're going to loop through all of these text boxes, and if one of the text boxes is empty, then we want to communicate that. We want to communicate that to Excel. And the way I usually do this, let's say, I'm going to say OK to proceed. This is going to be a true or false variable, so Boolean variable. Now this is where I can use Control and N, so I can see DC and Jeff shouting at their screens at home. So what was it? Control space. Control space. I've already got the menu there. So Control space now. The menu's there, and then nice. And then can I hit Tab, and that all goes in. Fantastic stuff. Very good. Okay, so this OK to proceed variable, we're going to initialize this as false first. So this is going to control whether we proceed with the macro that inputs the data into the database. If the validation conditions are not met, so if we have empty text boxes, then we're going to make sure that this variable is set to false, and that's going to stop us going any further. Say OK to proceed equals true. And then, okay, so, and let's have a conditional statement here. Chris control dot value equals, then OK to proceed equals false. Here we go. Okay, so we're saying if there's nothing in the text box, so just using the speech marks here, if there's nothing in the text box, then we don't want to proceed. So we're going to set the value of the OK to proceed variable to false. And we're then going to use that variable later to control if we continue with the macro to put the data into the database or not. Let's see what happens here. So I'm going to step through the code again, F8 key. So it's about the 4th time through this loop. Yeah, we get to a text box, and the text box, well, the value is empty, because if we go to the user form now, user form has shrunk, of course, then we can see there's nothing in the text box here. So by default, the value is empty, but that proves that this little construct is working well. Let's step through it again. 1, 2, 3, 4 times. And then I just hover the cursor over the OK to proceed variable, and I can see that OK to proceed does equal false. Okay, so how is this actually going to fit in with the other code? So where is this code going to fit in? Well, when the user hits the continue button, we want Excel. I'm going to hit the continue button now. This is the code that runs when we hit the continue button. It's always interesting when you go back to code that you did a few years ago. I wrote this code a few years ago, I think in 2016, about 3 years ago. And let me know in the chat if you get this. Okay, see, DC's off, CEDC. Thanks for dropping in. But maybe Michelle, you feel this, or Jeff, if you're still with us, perhaps you feel this. But yeah, when you go back to old work, you know, not just Excel, and you think, I could have done that so much better, or if I did that work now, I would do it differently. And what I'm seeing when I see this code, it does makes me cringe a little bit, because there's this is just repeated code here. All of this is repeated code, so we should be using with and end with to improve the efficiency here, and just to save on the amount of text in the VBA editor, to save on typing, to save on the amount of text you've got to assimilate to understand the code. So maybe we'll do that. Maybe that's going to be another video, you know, simplifying old routines, improving old routines. Anyway, so up at the top here, yeah, we want to call our routine. Before we do anything, we want to do the validation. And what's the name of our routine? It is validate entries. So I'm going to copy that, Control C. And then where's our code? We've got to go through the user form, of course. Double click on the continue button to get to the continue code. And here we go. And say call validate entries. And there it is. Okay, so we've got to think of a way to get the information from this variable here. We've got this OK to proceed variable, but that's sitting in a routine in another module. So how are we going to get that information into this routine here? I'm clicking through to it now, into this routine. So we could do that using a variable, and we'd need, I think we need a module level. No, we'd need some kind of global variable. Let me know in the chat if Jeff's still here, or Michelle. Let me know what kind of variable, but we could do that using a variable, but we'd have to think about the scope of the variable. Typically a variable, its scope, if you declare it in a routine like these variables here, then the scope of the variable is only the routine. So it can't pass information to a variable outside of that routine. So we'd have to declare a variable with a bigger scope. I think you do that using public, I think, or global. Rather than doing that, my preferred approach is usually to store the information on a backend sheet. Okay, and we can see we've also already got some information on the backend sheets here. So I've just hit the engine sheet. I'm going to say validation check here. So this is B6, back to the VBA editor. So we're going to say everything is okay. So we're going to say sheets engine. It was B6. Okay, there we go. Control S, save the file. Now what's this going to do? It's just going to put OK into the workbook, onto this worksheet, but that means we've got the information stored somewhere, and any other routine that needs the information can access that worksheet and get it quickly. And Jeff's confirming in the chat, yeah, we could use a public variable to do this. I'm going to do it using a worksheet. As always, different ways of doing it. Well, briefly, if we did this using a variable, we could say that's a more robust approach because the user can't access a variable. You know, you could say this is a bit of a risky approach because this sheet is, it's not protected. This sheet is visible, it's not hidden. So the user could access these values here, these control values, if you like, and mess things up. So the argument for using a variable would be the information is locked away in the VBA editor. But the advantage of using a worksheet is it's more transparent. So it's good for teaching purposes, for example, because we can easily understand the values of the variables because we can see them in the worksheet. So as with anything in Excel, VBA, IT design, life, different approaches have pros and cons. And on the channel, you know, I'm trying to encourage you to adopt the perspective of what I call the reflective practitioner, And the reflective practitioner usually doesn't say, this is the way to do it. The reflective practitioner says, this is a possible way. These are the pros and the cons. This is another possible way. These are the pros and the cons. Okay, right. So in the VBA editor, I'm going to put a breakpoint in here. I just want to check that when I hit the command button on the user form, that we're going into this code and that we're putting a value into this cell. So just a small check here, and this is how you should be doing testing. Do it in little chunks, small chunks. Don't leave it all till the end. So we're going to go add new here. Let me see if I can resize the user form quickly and just grab it here. Okay, not easily done, not easily done. Okay, there we go. Hopefully that resizes the user form so that you can see it. Let's go to add. Okay, user form is still tiny, just big enough to work with. So apologies for that. I'm going to hit continue here. Yeah, and I can see we've got into the code. We've stopped at the breakpoint, which is, just shows how cool breakpoints are. We've got a video on the Tiger Spreadsheet Solutions channel, which is called 17 Things You Have to Know About the VBA Editor, that we released a couple of months ago, popular video. So it tells you all the tips and tricks like this for working with the VBA editor. So has that value appeared on the engine sheet? And I can see, yeah, OK has now appeared on the engine sheet. So I'm satisfied that that mechanism is working. So OK to proceed equals false. Which makes me think maybe we don't need this variable. Maybe we can just get rid of this variable. OK. Yeah, I'm just going to comment out this variable for the time being. I mean, one possible approach is using variables, but let's just do this. Okay, let's just put an exclamation mark in that. Cool, so what's going to happen now? If there's nothing in one of the text boxes, then it's going to go to the engine sheet, go into the engine sheet now, and it's going to change this value to an exclamation mark. So let's see if this happens. Yep, let's go into the VBA editor here. Going through the code, going to step through the code using the F8 key, stepping through the code with the F8 key here. Okay, we get to the text box, so now we're into the conditional statement. And you should see this value where it says OK here. We should see this value change. Okay, we can see the value change there. Right. So that means that if there's not a value in the text box, then we should see that this is going to change on the engine sheet. And we can then go back to the other code. Userform seems to be shrinking every time. Not particularly helpful. Let me see if I can resize it on this screen here. Just bear with me a second. Okay. There we go. Save the file here. Okay, how does this display now? If I go to add. Okay, good. Slightly better now. So, yeah, let's not do it now. I'm just going to rearrange the VBA editor. Apologies for the slight delay here. And the VBA editor is back. Okay, so now we can go back to this continue code. And I want to say here, okay, so recall validate entry. So we've gone to our other routine. In fact, let's just see this in action. So I'm going to open up the user form here, hit continue, and then because we've got the breakpoint in, we've stopped there. I'm going to hit the F8 key. You'll see how we jump over to the other routine. Now this code lives with the user form, lives with its parent, lives with the user form. So if you click on the user form here, you'll be able to access that code. But you'll see we're going to jump into module 2 now. When we hit F8 here, we've jumped into module 2. So that shows how you can get these routines to interact. So now we're going to go through this routine. So we've got various mechanisms here to getting interaction between these routines, interaction between the worksheet and the VBA editor. All of these things interacting creates these powerful routines. Okay, back to this code here. Yep, so now we're going to run this validate entries, which is the new routine we've just created. Then we want to say if B6 equals, well, let's say it does not equal OK. Then, well, that means that the validation showed that some of the text boxes are empty. So we want to tell the user that and exit the routine. So we don't want to execute any code. We don't want to try to put anything into the database. We want to notify the user here. So we're going to say message box. Let's say check text box entries. Zeros is a simple message box. And then we can say check. Nice and simple. And then crucially, the line of code to exit the routine. So that means we won't execute any of this code down here, which is the code that puts the data in the database. Not going to execute any of that because we're saying to Excel here, exit the routine. And let's say up here, okay, I'm going to put a comment above all of this code to say code to validate user form. Let me know in the chat if you're following along, by the way. Okay, and let me know what else you'd like to see on the Skunkworks. I mean, this video is just a result of a question on the YouTube channel. So, yep, if you subscribe to the Skunkworks, you know, leave a comment on one of the videos. Let me know what you'd like to see. Okay, so what's going to happen now? Well, hopefully, now if we get the user form coming up here. Now, if I just hit continue straight away, just going to hit continue here, we can see, okay, didn't end the if here, end, should be end if, of course. Okay, I'm going to quickly resize this user form once more. So just bear with me a second, please. Okay, bear with me a second. So it requires some very intricate mouse work. Seem to have got it done there. Okay, let's save that. Okay, it's got the user form now. Oh, we did have the user form, seems to have disappeared. Okay, the user form's over here. Yeah, so now if we hit continue, what are we expecting to happen? Well, we can see that we've got empty boxes. So our code should go to our validate entries routine. It's going to loop through the controls, go through those text boxes. It's going to realize that at least one of the text boxes is empty. That means it's going to go to the engine sheet, change the value in that cell, that control cell, cell B6, change the value in the cell to an exclamation mark. And that means when we go back to the main routine, the routine that runs when we hit the continue button, we're going to exit the routine there. So let's try it, hit continue, and it says check and check text box entries. Okay, seems to be working well. So what if we just make sure these are all populated? Okay, exercise status plenty. Then let's hit continue here and we can see I've been added to the database there. Let's suppose we just forget to fill out one of these. Let's see if this works. So I'm going to leave the age. Exercise is filled out. So what happens now? We can see, yep. So our validation mechanism has worked there. And then let's go back here, continue. And the validation has worked again. And then let's try this one here. Hit continue, and the validation has worked again. Okay, yeah, so this is how to validate a user form by going through, looping through the controls. Let's go back to the VBA editor briefly. Just bring this into your screenshot again. So what do? Let's review this task where we created a new routine just in a module. Remember, this is in module 2 here, and this routine is going to validate the entries. It's going to do that by looping through all of the controls. So everything we can see on the user form, we call the controls. We're going to loop through them. Then we've got a conditional statement here saying if this control is a text box, then we want to check the value. If the value equals nothing, then we want to go to the engine sheet and change the value there to an exclamation mark. So we've got this control cell here on the engine sheet. If that's an exclamation mark, well, that's important because when we get back to the user form code here, first we're going to check using this conditional statement here. We're going to check if the value does not equal OK. If it does not equal OK, and remember, the first thing we do is we kind of initialize this value by setting it to OK. If it doesn't equal OK, then we're going to exit the sub there. So that's the mechanism I recommend you use for validating Excel VBA user forms. It's the technique that I use in my work, and I hope that you can get it working for yourself too. Any questions in the chat? No further questions in the chat. Okay, we'll leave it there tonight, guys. Thank you so much for watching. Let me know what you want to see on the Excel Spreadsheet Skunkworks channel. We're going to be streaming a couple of times a week. We've got the chess stream most Tuesdays, and then streaming, live. Hopefully kind of feels a bit raw, but hopefully this gives you a sense of how Excel VBA development works and gives you the confidence to try to do it yourself. That's what we're doing on this channel. On the Tiger Spreadsheet Solutions channel, we've got more formal structured presentations. I'd love to see you there as well. We're doing one video a week over there at the moment. So that's it for now, guys.